All material used within this production is included under the doctrines of fair use as provided for under US and UK copyright laws as described in the information panel for this video. Any attempt to take down this video through the DMCA procedures of YouTube will result in a counter notification for its immediate restoration. The video will also be mirrored across several other YouTube channels. Further, legal action will be taken if the video is not restored or if multiple DMCA actions are taken against the video. Censorship is not a valid argument. This video is a reauthoring of my earlier series entitled Educating Nephilim-Free, which was in need of a cleanup and quality control due to uploading issues and other factors that led to the production not being how I wanted it. The allow for unlimited video length on my channels has given me a reason to remaster the video, which I have. It has also allowed me the opportunity to reformat and re-implement certain ideas that have come to me while considering this. I shall explain the changes that are a result of this video. The primary change is in the order the video is in. One of the things that was the most egregious on the part of our creationist fellow, Mr. Evan Phillips, aka NephilimFree, was the decision to quote mine practically the whole video. Very little was in its original order, almost the whole production was out of sequence in some fashion or other. This remade response will now take the step of restoring the original intended order that the extant Dodos presented their video in. You will notice this especially in the presentation of the original extant Dodo segments and the Pendleton segments that they are responding to. Another change I will be making is in the implementation of a fallacy scoring system. Partway through the series production last time I decided to implement the scoring system. Its implementation was not as I wished it to be until close to the end of the series. I now have the opportunity to implement it in the same manner from the very beginning. Since this is going to be one video instead of multiple parts, I will tally up the totals for the entire effort at the end. Please be advised that the original video series Educating the Dodo has been removed by NephilimFree, the reasons for which are unknown. The copy I have sourced is the mirror that Beret Beacon made on his channel and which is of significantly poorer quality and lower resolution. Since this has rendered much of the original text unreadable, I have taken the step of sourcing the info slides where possible from my previous series in order to have them presented as legible text. Otherwise you will notice a significant degradation in the quality of the material from NephilimFree. Where the quality is too low and alternative sources are not available, I will rewrite the information and overlay it. Where necessary, I have remade the supplementary video segments from their source videos and included or linked them at the relevant points in the video. Finally, a number of minor changes have been made that will become noticeable throughout the video as you watch it. Beginning with addressing the misinformation NephilimFree made against the extant Dodos, I will correct his bulleted list. They are American students, plural, yes, there are two of them. At the time of the video that they made, they were studying for a joint medical doctorate PhD program, so yes, they did have college degrees. And this statement is wrong. The scientific evidence supports the consensus that the Earth is 4.5 billion years of age. And coming on to the UFO segment, no, they are not insane. Believing that UFOs are from a mythical being from a book of fables and myths is the very definition of insanity. The creationist also presents a false dichotomy. Man-made UFOs are routinely mistaken for the extraterrestrial variety simply because their designs are so out of the ordinary. And any sufficiently advanced alien species will be able to overcome the distance and space flotsam issue presented here. And creationists are not real scientists, regardless of whatever qualifications, real or imagined, they trot out. This is because they have sacrificed their intellectual integrity, requiring them to only go where the evidence takes them in preference for their attempts to reinforce their religious beliefs. Creationists are also well known for proclaiming they know science better than those scientific minds who actually do the hard work. We will now start with the extant Dodo video, as originally intended.
Hello once again, I'm chemist John Morris Pendleton.
Who is John Pendleton? He's an American missionary in Mexico. He has a bachelor's degree in chemistry, and he's an advocate of a 24-hour day creation. He also believes UFOs come from Satan. He will attend a debate if all expenses are paid, and he states a love offering is optional, whatever that is.
And we're now in our 5th conference, and this is one of the really exciting ones, because I know it's a question that lots of people have. What is the age of the Earth?
4.5 billion years.
When did the creation actually occur?
4.5 billion years ago.
And of course, we're going to go to the Bible.
Let's not use the lead-lead isochron dating or the various independently verified radiometric datings, Let's instead use the scientific book that states pi is equal to 3 and that the sun revolves around the Earth.
Radiometric dating.
Yeah, it's a real riot, I'm sure. So, who is NephilimFree? He's a young Earth creationist and a geocentrist, a self-proclaimed non-denominational fundamentalist Christian. He believes that UFOs come from Satan despite a distinct lack of evidence for the existence of said mythological creature. He relies heavily on logical fallacies including the straw man and the false dichotomy. He holds absolutely no scientific qualifications whatsoever, yet he feels qualified to criticize those who do hold said qualifications and who actually perform the hard work. He holds fallacious arguments for biblical history and engages in apologetics whenever he is called out on it. Is well known for ad hominems, put-downs and insults against his critics, despite the fact that he denies this. He censors his channel and those he doesn't like, and is unable to provide peer-reviewed sources for any of his claims.
Everybody knows that stuff is flawed, big time.
Oh, of course, everyone knows that. Except for the scientists who utilize the techniques in the correct fashion, of course. This will be elaborated on later in the video.
Based on assumptions as well.
That was an outright lie.
Now, as for pi in the Bible, I'm not going to go into the details. You can see the math on the screen. It's very close to actual pi.
This is something that people like myself take a lot of heat in regards to. The discussion of mathematics in the Bible. Allow me to explain. Many people who are fundamentalists make the claim that their book is the most scientifically advanced book ever written. Aside from the fact that just reading the damn thing will disabuse all but the most indoctrinated of this notion, there is the issue of mathematical precision. Pi has been calculated to approximately 10 trillion digits using computers, meaning that we know what pi is supposed to be at that level of precision. The fact that this answer is not even accurate to 2 decimal places is a big problem for the scientific claims for the Bible. It is scientifically inaccurate. It may be reasonable for layman applications and for making approximate measurements, but it is not in any way a scientifically accurate claim. By the way, unless you follow the convoluted mathematics presented here, then the only way that you can solve for a circumference of 30 and a diameter of 10 is by division, and 30 divided by 10 is 3. This is where the extant dodos got their numbers from, and while it does nothing to further the argument, it still isn't incorrect. I do have to wonder though why the creationists did not address the issue of the sun revolving around the earth, a claim in the Bible that has been conclusively demonstrated as both ludicrous and completely wrong.
Pretty darn close.
Not close enough.
Certainly not 3, as you claimed.
As they claimed? By the way, I wonder why the creationist is using an imperial unit of measurement. It has been pointed out to me in the past that the cubit is not a standardized measure and is subject to discrepancies in its actual length when applied on multiple occasions. This creationist mathematical slide is therefore nothing more than apologetics nonsense.
You need to lay off these atheist/evolutionist websites. They band together, I guess.
I was wondering when this would start. We are only at the first few minutes before we've even begun to address the claims at their heart, and already the creationist has played the evil evolutionist conspiracy card.
But they're filling your head full of crap.
Frankly, this was childish.
Now about your assumption that the age of the Earth is billions of years.
Assumption, Mr. Creationist? If the extant dodos have made any assumptions at all, they have done so based on the available evidence from a wide variety of scientific disciplines. In the case of radiometric dating, this is demonstrable through nuclear synthesis in reactors at labs, and extensive experimentation has demonstrated that radionuclide decay, the basis of all radiometric dating processes, follows a precise mathematical law. You'll note that the creationist has yet to provide even an argument, much less any evidence, that radionuclide decay does not occur in the way that the various radiometric dating labs have described.
When we take all the historical information and the cultural information, and then we compare that with scientific information, it all verifies the Bible.
This claim is unsourced and can easily be demonstrated to be false. A high school graduate who is yet to go to college is in a position to debunk this nonsense. Problem number 1. The Earth is not 6,000 years old. Problem 2. Species appear and disappear even today. Problem 3. Plants cannot survive without photosynthesis, which requires UV light, the primary source of which being the sun. I will elaborate more on this at the relevant points.
The creation, the Noachian flood, the Tower of Babel.
This is mythical nonsense. The development of languages throughout history is an active area of research and is reasonably well understood. We can trace the ancestry of our languages throughout history, and many of them share a common source. This Tower of Babel nonsense is ludicrous. I can understand people wanting to reach what they think of as heaven by building a tower, but I cannot understand an all-powerful deity who can see everything and know everything before it happens, deciding to force them to speak different languages when he is supposed to know that they can never get to this heaven in the first place.
All those things. Supported by science? What do you know?
A lot more than the creationist, it would seem.
So I guess that means the Bible's right after all, isn't it?
It does nothing of the kind.
The Earth is only 6 or maybe 6,500 years old.
This assertion is without evidential support.
Gosh. What happened to your billions of years? Oh, I forgot. Assumptions.
Making appeals to ridicule based on a series of falsehoods is not a clever way to conduct a video response.
Yeah, isometric, radiometric dating.
Calling this creationist a moron would be an insult to morons. However, when he demonstrates this jaw-dropping lack of attention that is evident in him getting a detail such as the use of a correct word so thoroughly wrong despite having edited the original video himself in which the correct word was used, I feel justified in pointing this out. Oh, and isochron, not isometric. So, after this childish statement by the creationist, what can we conclude from this segment? Simple. All he did was make a claim that radiometric dating was flawed, unsurprisingly without backing it up. He then went on to pick apart the off-handed statement the extant Dodos made about pi, made no retort to the sun revolving around the Earth, and capped it off by using an ad hominem attack followed by baseless assertions regarding the Bible, with appeals to ridicule in connection with isochron and radiometric datings. Let's move on.
Now, by comparison, looking at two timelines, one of what the Bible says, one of what evolutionists say.
Evolutionists do not say anything about the age of the Earth. Evolutionists talk about the change in allelic frequency in populations caused by natural selection and genetic drift. You know, evolution. However, rational people say the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. And evolutionists are a pretty rational lot, so we'll forgive the error, but only because you're wearing a lab coat.
This segment by the extant Dodos is fairly obvious. Unlike the remainder of the video, I'm going to make a small departure. This is what he did with it.
It was about 20 billion years ago.
It was 13.7. Evolutionists do not say anything about the age of the Earth. Evolutionists do not say anything about the age of the Earth. However, rational people say the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. And evolutionists are a pretty rational lot. So evolutionists do not say anything about the age of the Earth. Evolutionists do not say anything about the age of the Earth.
Evolution, it was about 20 billion years ago.
It was 13.7. Evolutionists do not say anything about the age of the Earth. Evolutionists do not say anything about the age of the Earth.
You cannot reject the age of the Earth without, in effect, saying that there could never have been an atomic bomb.
Evolutionists do not say anything about the age of the Earth. Evolutionists do not say anything about the age of the Earth.
They're revealing just how intimately life and the planet are connected. We'll never fully understand the history of living organisms unless we first understand Earth's own story.
Evolutionists do not say anything about the age of the Earth. Evolutionists do not say anything about the age of the Earth.
How to give an idea of the real time span of the world. How to give an idea of the real time span of the world.
Evolutionists do not say anything about the age of the Earth.
Pretty juvenile, wasn't it? Now, let's return to our regular schedule.
We have the creation of everything happened about 6,000 years ago. About 4,400 years ago, the worldwide flood occurred, of which 8 people were saved. Jesus was born of the Virgin Mary 2,000 years ago, and we expect that maybe in the next 5 minutes that he could come back again to rule the earth.
Yeah, we wish. Then we wouldn't have to watch the rest of this drivel.
Are you ready? He could come back. He is coming back, and it could be soon. Now, according to the Big Bang Theory and evolution, it was about 20 billion years ago.
It was 13.7 billion years ago.
There was a big bang, a big explosion.
It was a rapid expansion of space-time.
Which is an explosion, just as Mr. Pendleton stated.
Completely wrong. The dictionary definition provided on screen is not accurate. For one thing, it describes an expansion of matter and energy within the space-time framework of the universe. The zero-space singularity at the beginning of the Big Bang was not within or occupying space or time. The Big Bang did not occur within space-time. The Big Bang was an expansion of space and time. The extant Dodos were correct. The creationists are not.
Millions and millions of years went by. 4.6 billion years ago, the Earth was formed.
Let's get this straight. Life started on Earth somewhere between 4.4 billion years ago, after liquid water formed, and 2.7 billion years ago, the date of the earliest evidence of life.
No.
This is someone like talking to a child. You point out a fact, and he plugs his fingers in his ears, saying, "No, it's not true, la 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 la," while stamping his feet. Simply saying no does not change the fact that the extant Dodos are correct. But just for kicks, let's listen on.
So your preconceived notion of when life began on this planet is the result of brainwashing.
It takes a hell of a lot of stones for a fundamentalist to make the accusation of brainwashing to anyone else on Earth.
By evolutionist scientists who tell you that these absurd and completely flawed radiometric dating processes, which are not capable of telling us how much of an element existed on the Earth at the beginning of its creation, which we have no way of knowing.
The creationist has asserted a claim that radiometric dating processes are completely flawed. He then asserted that we have no way of knowing how much of an element existed at the so-called creation. The first is provided without any supporting evidence. The second is irrelevant to the process of radionuclide decay. Allow me to expand on this. Radionuclide decay follows a precise mathematical law. This law was formulated after thousands of experiments with radioactive isotopes in radionuclide labs using nuclear reactors to synthesize the various isotopes that are still present today. We know the half-lives of the isotopes in question. Not a single isotope has ever been demonstrated to deviate from the precise mathematics that have been formulated to determine how to measure decay rates and half-lives. The only way a creationist can claim that radiometric dating is completely flawed is by telling a direct lie. A video explaining radiometric dating is provided here.
Are capable of somehow telling us, through its decay rate, how much should be left.
This has been observed.
Which is of course impossible.
And an argument from personal incredulity rears its ugly head. It also flies in the face of the evidence.
It's also an absolute denial of the massive quantities of water that are on this Earth and always have been on this Earth.
It appears as though we are going off on a tangent. Unfortunately, this is a recurring theme for this particular creationist. He often fails to address the actual point. In addition, we're going to come back to this flood nonsense again. The simple fact, though, is that there is insufficient water underground to create this mythical flood. Once we reach the end of this segment, I will provide an explanation for why this is.
Because, of course, there is no natural process which could have possibly created so much water.
For once, this creationist is correct. There is no natural process that could create the amount of water necessary to flood Mount Everest in the short amount of time available. This is among the other problems for the flood. Again, I will expand upon this shortly.
And it's obvious that you're also quite unaware of something that evolutionist scientists really don't want you to know.
The creationist continues to demonstrate his insanity.
Which is that water is not just on the Earth, but it's all throughout the Earth.
It would make for a refreshing change if the creationist could tell us something we weren't already aware of. The United States Geological Survey and several scientific journals, including Nature, all carry the requisite information on water storage, inclusive of all underground sources, including that which is molecularly suspended within the mantle.
You see, all the way through the crust of the Earth, down into the solid mantle of the Earth, there are molecules of water captured in solid granite.
Old arguments that real scientists long ago refuted are being recycled by this trailer park creationist who hasn't even a basic high school understanding of physics. The creationist has also neglected to mention that the mantle, as well as the crustal rocks above it, can retain approximately 0.1 to 0.2% of their own mass in water. Above that point is the saturation level, and any excess water molecules will need somewhere else to occupy.
In fact, there are pockets of water in the mantle itself, so water's always been present everywhere. In fact, there are massive pockets of water under the surface of the Earth, deep down into the crust of the Earth.
Now the creationist is getting repetitive. This is another problem for the creationist. His responses are so disorganized, disjointed, and incoherent, it's like trawling through the Mississippi mud to get to them.
These are called aquifers, you see.
More illiteracy. They're called aquifers, not aquifers.
In fact, there is more water than that. Even below that there is water. I'm talking about massive quantities of water.
According to the United States Geological Service, the breakdown is as follows.
So you see, if water had formed in the earth because it was boiling hot and whatnot...
Now we're going off on yet another tangent.
The water would have been on the surface of the earth, because it would have been gas, it would have evaporated. It would not be down into the earth. Massive lakes of water.
The creationist has no understanding of how pressure systems work. This is evident in his initial response to my earlier series of videos. Any gaseous substance can liquefy at temperatures beyond their boiling points if they are pressurized sufficiently. If this were not the case, we would not be able to bottle oxygen or other gases for later consumption, for example. And we often see geysers releasing boiling hot water across various landscapes. That's an example of pressure release. Further, his assertion that there are massive lakes of water is nonsensical. It ignores the previously mentioned facts concerning pressure systems and the USGS data. In any event, the runaway subduction, hydroplate, and vapor canopy ideas have all been refuted.
Under the surface of the earth. Because the heat of the earth, if the earth cooled with water on its surface, you see.
Now we've descended into meaningless word salad. This is what happens when someone decides to make stuff up in support of their religious beliefs, especially if they talk straight off the top of their head, like this creationist.
Without the hand of God, there could not be these massive quantities of water below the surface of the earth deep into its crust.
Finally, the creationist has betrayed his foundational bias. He's invoked the miracle. Miracles are magic. Absolutely nothing is scientific about them. One might as well proclaim that lightning is Thor's anger. I guess we can all start worshipping Poseidon now.
You see, you're not a thinker. You just swallow what you're told. And, well, that's why you're wrong.
So, within the space of 10 seconds or so, a single sentence in NephilimFree's speech, he has committed 2 instances of Freudian projection, 1 instance of hypocrisy, and an ad hominem attack. To summarise this passage, the creationist didn't actually address the extant Dodo's point at all. He went off on some nonsense about the flood. Again, the video linked here will address some of the problems with the global flood myth in more detail. Let's move on.
From where they don't know it, collected water began raining on the earth, and 3 billion years ago the first life forms appeared which survived, had something to eat, and were interested and able to reproduce themselves into all the forms we have today.
Geez, when you put it that way. Actually, your strawman argument still sounds more convincing than God did it in a day.
Now, where do we get the idea from the Bible that the creation of everything happened 6,000 years ago? In the Bible, beginning with chapter 5 of Genesis, we have genealogies.
Caution, incoming Hovind chart.
And we start with Adam, and it gives the age of the father when a key son was born in the line that eventually reached to Jesus Christ. And so we begin adding up these ages, and we come up that the flood occurred 1,656 years after the creation. After the flood, we continue to count genealogies. We have the age of the father when their son was born. Then we have time of captivity in Egypt, then coming out, wandering in the wilderness, the different years for judges and kings ruling over Israel, other ages of captivities. And we come all the way down to the final book of the Old Testament, the book of Malachi, where from history we add between 300 to 400 years.
Sure, what's a few hundred years between friends?
Note before I proceed to the creationist response. He's responded to this particular clip twice, each at different points in his response, each going off on different tangents. For the sake of thoroughness, I will address them in the order they appear in the video. Here's the first.
He said between 300 and 400 years, which is a potential variation of 100 years.
It would be a good idea for the creationist to get to a point. A better idea would be for the creationist to focus on something less trivial than this ridiculous semantics game.
Not a couple, 100 years like you said.
It's completely irrelevant. It's a variation nonetheless.
So here you are playing the semantics game that the evolutionists always do, trying to, exaggerate everything they say and, distort what they say.
The only one playing semantics games is the creationist. Distorting what people say is exactly what he has just done. It still does nothing to refute the point that the extant Dodo's made, that being to comment on a variation.
Because you don't have anything to stand on yourself, because evolution theory is purely speculation and conjecture based on assumptions, you see, and then presented as scientific fact as if there is empirical scientific evidence for it. when in fact there is no scientific evidence for it at all.
Evolution, the change in the frequency of alleles in a gene pool from one generation to the next. More than 50,000 peer-reviewed articles and papers exist to refute the claim that evolutionary biology is speculative conjecture without any evidence to support it. In short, the creationist is projecting again. Now I will address the second occasion this clip comes up.
Or 100 million for that matter.
This is what the creationist slide underneath says. These results have a deviation of 100 million years of age. That's a maximum difference of approximately 2.22%, which is acceptable given our current understanding. The Apollo missions weren't as good as 10% deviation. This one is even worse than the last one. Take a look at what he does here. This has to be the worst case of quote mining I've seen from a creationist in a while.
You see, everything about evolution theory, including cosmology,
Cosmology is not evolution.
and astronomy, are based upon assumption.
According to this creationist, anything that does not agree with his biblical indoctrinated interpretation of the universe must by definition be based upon assumptions.
It's speculation and conjecture.
Or speculation and conjecture. The creationist position that a magical being did all of this is itself based entirely on speculation, conjecture, and bizarre assumptions. The only way for creationists to be believed now is to attack the scientific method itself, using some of the most dishonest tactics any politician could possibly wish to use, and hope that people are stupid enough to fall for their nonsense.
Evolutionist scientists used to speculate that all the matter in our solar system spun from the same original ball of molten material.
Has this creationist been drinking again? It's either that or he's being willingly dishonest. Take your pick, Mr. Creationist, because this pile of horseshit you just spouted is completely baseless.
But of course creationist scientists have proven this wrong.
That's as dishonest as the claim that creation scientists were responsible for exposing Piltdown as a fraudulent hoax, when in reality it was the scientific community who were responsible for exposing the Piltdown fraud over 70 years ago. While creationists, they sat around and did nothing.
So they invented a new hole for their theory. That is, a foreign body came through.
The creationist has no idea how nebular star formation works. The presence of higher elements in our star system demonstrates that our Sun is a population 1 star, created due to a chain reaction triggered by the destruction of a long-dead population 2 star in the area. Real scientists know this. Notice how far off the subject we've come.
And then there's the Oort cloud.
Down and down the rabbit hole we go.
Oh, something undetectable, unseen, unknown.
Undetectable, unseen, unknown. This has to be the most epic fail of all time. There are a variety of sources on the Oort cloud, some of them linked here.
Ooh, the mystery of it all. You see, that's their science. The undetectable is there. That's proof that it happened, because we can't see it. Hey, did you know that in contradiction to the scientific law of conservation of angular momentum,
Hovindism number 3, the conservation of angular momentum. Isn't it nice to know that our creationist is making the same errors as his hero, Kent Hovind?
that there are 9 moons in our solar system which spin backwards from the planets that they orbit. Now, of course, this is impossible, according to evolutionist thinking.
Oh, really? Well, no evolutionist makes the claim that planets spinning in counter-orbital or off-axial directions is impossible. Ever. The rest of this non-response to the extant Dodos has been cut. Frankly, it's a load of nonsense and goes even further off the beaten path. All the creationist does is make appeals to ridicule with respect to dark matter, followed by another appeal to consequences.
To when Christ was born. That's a total of about 4,000 years. From Christ to today is 2,000. 4 plus 2 is 6,000 years.
Well, that sounds pretty scientific. Oh wait, that's just the lab coat again.
Now let me give you a little suggestion. When God reveals a truth in His Word, He reveals it many, many times from different angles in different ways to confirm the truth of it.
Except where those angles differ, like they do in the conflicting genealogies of Joseph, as recounted in Matthew chapter 1 verse 1 and Luke chapter 3 verse 23.
Oh dear, more stink.
Indeed, this is generally what happens when creationists start to open their mouths to speak. Let's have this one give us an example now, shall we?
You just don't have the correct information. There is no conflict.
So this creationist now has secret esoteric knowledge that his Bible does not have internal inconsistencies, despite a literal reading of the text without the benefits of being indoctrinated into the religion, giving a contrary position. Or is it more likely that this is just more apologetics nonsense?
Of course, you get all your information from amateur evolutionists who put forth one stinker and another, and none of them have the right information.
The creationist really needs to do a lot better than an ad hominem attack and an appeal to ridicule. More to the point, he needs to actually present information that we haven't seen before, as opposed to this.
So in the case of when the creation occurred, we also have from the book of Luke angle that goes back the other direction.
And as mentioned, it is different than Matthew chapter 1, verse 1.
Because in Luke 3 we have the genealogy through Joseph all the way back from Jesus until Adam. Of course, Joseph was Jesus' political father, but still we have the genealogy in that direction. It turns out to be 75 generations. Now, I propose that we take an average of about 50 years for every generation, between father and when this son was born.
Sure, make up whatever numbers you want to fit your theory. That's how creation science works.
Now, I realize that sometimes it was more time than that, sometimes it was less time than that, but we just want to get an idea. So if we take 75 generations, multiplied by 50 years for each generation, we get 3,750 years, very close to our total of some 4,000 years from the creation until Christ was born.
Why settle for a 6.25% margin of error? You can just make up better numbers. Psst. 53.3 years per generation will get it dead on.
The length of a human generation is not precise.
Well now, they're stating the obvious. Anyway, this slide of the creationists, it's just some made up nonsense of his, and doesn't even address the point. Watch this video for more accurate information instead.
Never has been throughout the history of the world, still not today. But maybe when you figure out how long that generation is, to the very month, hour, and minute, you should just let us know.
Now this did nothing to refute their main point, that being a bunch of made up numbers used to justify the biblical stance on the world and the universe.
And so it confirms that attitude.
Let's summarize. Using conflicting accounts of the genealogy and guesstimates of ages, you arrive at your preconceived idea. Wow. Just wow.
Well, you've learned already that there is no conflict in the genealogy.
No. All anyone has learned is the creationist willingness to engage in apologetics games. Furthermore, these slides are egregious. They slide by at quite a rate. I've reproduced them here in their original form so that you can see them clearly, but again, they are rife with inaccuracies and distortions of fact. I cover this in a little more detail in my supplementary video, the ones you see linked below to the left. And the one below to the right is another link to the earlier extant Dodo's video, which includes details of transitional forms.
And that scientific methods used by evolutionist scientists are full of speculation and conjecture.
Projection.
Learned that too. You should be learning also that evolution history is rife with hoaxes.
And what can be seen at best as hyperbole, or at worst outright dishonesty.
Those are speculations and conjectures that presented as facts.
With more projection.
See, everything you believe about evolution is a lie.
I'm finishing up with another instance of projection. If this is what the creationist calls learning, then it's hardly a surprise that he doesn't have a job, hasn't had one for 4+ years, and can only ever aspire to leeching off of other people both financially and scientifically. His contributions to society are likely to be less than nil. Creationists often give Christians a bad name. This guy gives other creationists a bad name.
Now, from the evolutionary standpoint, their clock is called the geological time scale. Now, as you look at this list, don't say, my, what unusual names.
Are they more unusual than the names from your chart? You know, I'm not going to even read these.
Certainly less strange than a lot of names used today, and less strange than extant Dodo as well. Did you know, by the way, that the word Dodo, the name of the bird, has become synonymous with dummy?
Yeah, Mr. I'm not known for ad hominem attacks couldn't resist the urge to issue another one.
At least you know this one at 190 million years, which is the Jurassic period. All of you know about Jurassic Park. Actually, there's 3 periods here I want to mention for later reference. It's the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous rocks or periods. Now, the idea is this. These numbers here represent millions of years in the evolutionary timescale. And the idea is that the oldest rocks are furthest in the Earth. On top of them are younger rocks. On top of them are younger rocks. And so goes the sequence.
That's simplistic at best. The principle of superposition, that of older rocks on bottom, is only one of the many principles of stratigraphy. Superposition fails in many cases, including dynamic activity, like cross-cutting of one strata into another as plates shift, failure of supporting strata, like cave deposits from a collapse, or inclusion of strata into newer strata, like cross-cutting followed by erosion. In the cases of mountains, faults and folds make the situation considerably more complex. Superposition is one of many null hypotheses that are tested against evidence. It is not unshakable word.
Yes, indeed, it fails at times. So does everything about evolutionist concepts of geology.
I suppose congratulations are in order. The creationists managed to evade another point. Not successfully, of course, but there you go.
But you haven't offered any rebuttal whatsoever for what Mr. Pendleton said, just a description of superposition.
The extant Dodos went on to explain how it can be interfered with by a variety of other well-documented processes that can have an effect on this process. The creationist either 1. Chose to deliberately ignore this, 2. Failed to recognize this, or 3. Is incapable of understanding this.
A description of something is not evidence that it has or has not happened.
No, but chalk this up to another red herring.
Now, we asked the evolutionist, where can we go in the world to see exactly, in sight, these layers of rocks exactly as you've laid out there?
You can find evidence for the basic truth of the principle of superposition almost anywhere. For instance, the Grand Canyon has one of the most complete in situ geologic columns in the entire world.
We're thinking, where could we go? Oh, I know. We could go to the Grand Canyon in Arizona. That hole is almost a mile deep.
In places, it is over a mile deep.
We have all kinds of layers of rock. Guess what? About 50% of them are missing.
Well, guess what? The missing layers were caused by a period of erosion about 1 billion years long between the two major periods of deposition, one 500 million years ago and the other 1.5 billion years ago. Note the principle of superposition isn't even violated here. It's just interrupted by erosion.
Well, this idea that missing layers are due to erosion is ridiculous.
The creationists should really learn how to use an internet platform other than Conservapedia and GodTube. Within a few minutes I managed to find evidence that demonstrates, yet again, that the creationist is either ignorant or a liar.
Evolutionists claim it's an excuse.
Creationists are the ones who must make excuses, as the existence of apologetics among other examples shows.
For why the geological column does not match their conception of the age of the Earth.
Geologists do not make conclusions before they have examined the evidence. That's the critical difference between creationists and real scientists.
You see, evolutionists claim that these layers, which are missing in many places all around the world,
The creationist has declared that there are missing layers in some geological features across the planet. This is predicted by plate tectonics and supports the theory. Ironically, this is also evidence against the flood myth. Finally, the fact that layers are not uniform is evidence that erosion happens, as if it were needed in the first place. The creationist is not exactly an experienced video editor. Furthermore, these pauses and other elements are evidence that the creationist is making stuff up off the top of his head.
The result of, erosion is completely absurd because they claim that these layers were laid down over periods of many tens of thousands of years, more often hundreds of thousands of years, and in cases millions of years.
What a surprise. The creationist has again asserted that geological erosion is absurd. His reason?
Because they claim these layers were tens, or hundreds, or thousands, or even millions of years old.
In other words, it disagrees with his biblical beliefs, and therefore must be rejected outright, as he is doing. Further, the evidence stands in stark contrast to this claim. He would have to deny his own eyesight to deny this happens.
Now, the Grand Canyon has numerous layers. Either a layer is there, or it's not there.
Once again, erosion can take place in an area, such as the Grand Canyon, and then later on, superposition can continue in the same area where the erosion happened earlier. Having had experience of dealing with this particular creationist in the past, it no longer surprises me that he is either unable to grasp this concept, or he refuses to let it sink in.
You don't say, there was a layer there, but it was gone because of, it eroded away. So we see that there was a layer there, but there wasn't. It's just ridiculous.
And that was an appeal to ridicule based on a previous argument from personal incredulity.
It's just not there, that's all. The idea that erosion took place on an area as massive as the entire Grand Canyon plain over a period of hundreds of thousands of years is absurd.
If the creationist is unable to grasp the simple, observable, observed fact of geologic erosion, that is his shortcoming. It does nothing to invalidate the fact that geologic erosion is something that people can witness for themselves.
Especially at the elevations of the central part of North America. It's just a ridiculous excuse. It is, however, a perfect example of how evolution science is not science at all, when it's purely speculation and conjecture presented as fact.
Now hang on, wait a minute. Why is the creationist changing the subject again? Weren't we talking about geologic erosion? Why are we now talking about biology again?
They do this, creation of sub-theories and conjuring scientific information whenever there's a hole in their theory, and they've been doing this with the fossil record of life for over 100 years.
4 times as many historians deny the Holocaust ever happened as biologists deny the fact of evolution. That doesn't mean the Holocaust never happened. All the creationist is doing is ignoring the DNA evidence, the fossil record, the observations made in labs, and the countless practical applications that we witness daily. If he ever has a heart attack or develops cancer, I hope he decides to go for faith healing. He will die shortly afterwards and rid us of his presence. The hypocrisy of him using the very fruits of the process he distorts to his own ends is too much for me to think about right now.
Also, as you can see in this next transparency, from Canada into the United States, all this red area is called Precambrian rock. This is rock that's even older than 600 million years. And the younger rock is underneath it. In other words, the whole thing is turned upside down.
He's ignoring geologic erosion and uplift. Remember, the superposition principle is the null hypothesis, to be tested against evidence and possibly rejected. This is what happens when they send a chemist to play geologist.
Rejected, all right.
This slide is nothing more than an argument from personal incredulity. It is also clear the creationist missed the point. I do have to ask though, why is the creationist insisting on not addressing the actual arguments presented by the extant dodos? They've already explained how superposition works, and they've explained where it can be affected by such things as cross-cutting uplift and other aspects of the processes of plate tectonics. Not surprisingly, the creationist is now required to attack the field of plate tectonics by willfully misrepresenting the extant dodo's points.
What you're suggesting is completely absurd, and no evolutionist geologists would say the same thing.
Bearing false witness against others is specifically condemned in the Bible, and that includes the favoured translation that this creationist uses, the King James Version. I have to wonder why he hates his own religion so much.
If one did, I'd laugh at him.
This is one of very few statements the creationist makes that I would accept at face value, not because he has a valid point, but because simple-minded people often ridicule that which they are incapable of understanding, as this creationist has demonstrated here. And for the record, real scientists don't give 2 hoots or a holler about a creationist's personal incredulity or appeals to ridicule on our expert fields of study.
You see, North America is all a part of the same continental plate.
This is absurd. The creationist appears here to be under the impression that continental plates are completely stationary and never change. But he will contradict himself later.
A massive, solid piece of the Earth's crust.
Once again, plate tectonics suggests, and the evidence bears this suggestion out, that crustal plates are not stationary or static. They do undergo changes through a variety of processes that are well documented in the field. It doesn't matter that the USA is on one continuous continental plate. This fact is irrelevant because this wasn't always the case, as anyone who works in the field of plate tectonics is very well aware of.
So Mr. Pendleton is not ignoring anything.
Dunning and Kruger, eat your hearts out.
However, you are ignoring the fact that North America is all on the same continental plate.
The creationist, as usual, is becoming repetitive, and the extant dodos have ignored nothing. They're well aware of this fact, just as they are well aware of the fact that it is completely and utterly irrelevant. They even provided references, something this creationist completely ignores, not surprisingly given his scientific references are a bunch of made-up slides with either misrepresented scientific data or creationist propaganda.
And there has been no superposition.
Even more illiteracy. It's superposition, not supposition.
Of such massive scale on the North American continent.
The creationist is either ignoring the Grand Canyon, or he's being dishonest, or he's too stupid. Or perhaps all three apply here. In any event, the creationist's personal incredulity notwithstanding, plate tectonics has evidential support.
As you can see from the obvious spreading of the plates.
Remember what I said earlier about the creationist contradicting himself? Well, here it is. Now he's decided to acknowledge that continental drift happens, when earlier he implied it doesn't by pointing out that North America was a single continental tectonic plate, inferring that nothing changes.
This is what happens when amateur and evolutionists attempt to debate well-educated creationists.
Remember earlier when I made reference to Dunning and Kruger? Well, the creationist just embodied the effect perfectly once again. His education is pretty much limited to an MSU, making shit up, in evolution, autocolarianism, and the Bible.
Actually, there's only one place in the world that you can go to consistently find, consistently see these layers of rock is laid out. You know where it's at? In the books. I told you, they're good at making fascinating drawings of things that don't exist. That is not science.
As mentioned, the principle of superposition is demonstrated almost anywhere you look, including the Grand Canyon. The basic idea is illustrated in books for the hopeful edification of others. The principle is also presented as a null hypothesis, subject to modification or rejection based on evidence. That is science.
Now, you've probably heard the little fairy tale about with a magic wand, you just touch the toad and it turns into a prince. Well, evolution is even more fantastic. They say this, that over millions of years ago, there were worms living at the bottom of the oceans and the seas. But through millions of years and some favorable accidents, some of them changed into fish. More favorable accidents and more millions and millions of years, some of them changed into amphibians, as a frog. With more favorable accidents and millions of years, some of them changed into primates, then into chimpanzee, and finally into our professor of biology.
Species which are extant, meaning they exist today, did not miraculously evolve from other species that are extant. Evolution is not depicted as a ladder of increasing complexity with humans on top, but it's seen as a dense bush with many diverse branches leading back to our common ancestor. However, some extant species, like worms, do closely resemble some of the earlier forms, perhaps explaining some of the confusion.
Not according to evolutionists.
This slide is a rather poor demonstration. It's not very clear for one thing, and it does not make the point the creationist is looking for, that being the validity of evolution being debunked by disappearing limbs. DNA explains the recession and dominance of traits, and that every day that passes, real scientists are discovering more and more how it works.
You see, the poster boy of evolution theory, the current one, Stephen Jay Gould, who invented this fantasy of punctuated equilibrium,
the creationist has no shame.
To explain why there are no transitional forms in the fossil record.
No transitional forms? That's another breach of the ninth commandment.
Which he admitted himself, and
once again, ladies and gentlemen, the ninth commandment. Thou shalt not bear false witness. What can be more false a witness than someone who claims that a paleontologist such as the late Stephen Jay Gould was simply patching up holes in the fossil record? The creationist is lying again.
Almost every major evolutionist mouth in the world has admitted to, including Richard Dawkins.
The creationist must really hate his religion if he's so ready and willing to break the ninth commandment in such a blatant fashion.
They would kind of disagree with you, you know. There's no evidence of one kind turning into another.
Ah, yes. The kinds argument. The favoured retreat of the fundamentalist biblical literalist. Can any creationist give us a rock-solid definition of what they consider a kind to be? If it's species, then we have evidence of kinds forming new kinds all the time. If it's a grouping further up the biological tree of life, then what is it? Without a rigid definition, there can be no blanket statement like that the creationist has made. One more thing. Evolution is not a ladder. I'd really appreciate it if creationists like this one would stop claiming we think otherwise.
So yeah, miraculous.
Appeals to ridicule are really old now. They were really old the first time I addressed this nonsense.
What you call miraculous, I call fantasy.
Yet what the creationist calls miraculous, sane people call fantasy. So once again, the extant Dodo's point went completely over the head of this creationist. Not surprising.
Now, for evolution, millions of years is indispensable for by chance happenings that this evolutionary process can take place. Obviously, if I had a worm here and say that at the end of my talk this would be a professor of biology, you say you're making fun of the biologist. But if I say over a period of millions and millions of years the worm became a professor of biology, you say, oh, that's quite believable.
This argument is specious at best. Millions of years are not indispensable to evolution. It's simply the amount of time life took to develop. Species change can take place in relatively few generations if selection is sufficiently strong, as proven by man's domestication of the wolf.
But speciation is not macroevolution.
Macro and microevolution are only different in the minds of creationists. Real scientists do not distinguish between the two in the scientific literature, especially as the results of the two concepts stem from the exact same biological processes: DNA mutation and natural selection. So contrary to the creationist claim, speciation is evolution.
And therefore it's not evidence of evolution.
3 years ago I suggested the following to the creationist: learn what evolution entails, then make a video criticizing the theory. His subsequent videos are evidence that he has done nothing of the sort. Not surprising, given he thinks that there are whales on the moon.
Speciation is simply variety within the original created kinds. It's expected.
Again, kinds. We still don't have a workable definition that we can test, nor can we expect creationists to provide one anytime soon. The moment they do, they're screwed. We'll be able to prove them wrong, which is why more intelligent ones never provide a workable definition.
Macroevolution has never been demonstrated or observed.
Sorry creationists, lying for Jesus is still lying. Simply typing observed instances of speciation into Google will provide the necessary information. If you wish to get more specific, typing it into Google Scholar will link to the scientific peer-reviewed literature where this is discussed. And again, as mentioned, speciation is evolution.
Had it ever occurred, it would dominate the fossil record of life on this planet and living things on this earth. Now, evolutionists are trying to fill in their holes with fantasies.
Repeated instances of projections such as this one really do get tiring after a while. I do have to wonder why creationists insist on this unethical and intellectually vapid behavior.
Have come up with the idea that, well, everything is a transitional form.
This is what the scientific community has observed.
Which is, of course, absurd.
Yet another argument from personal incredulity rears its ugly head. Sorry, Mr. 2 years of research. Transitional forms exist whether you like that fact or not.
Because there are no morphological differences between species which are great enough to consider them as one genus or another.
Now this is one of the best own goals I've ever seen. The creationist just pointed out that there are difficulties in classifying some species of life as one genus or another in the tree of life. The problem with him doing this is that it completely destroys his kinds nonsense and is in fact predicted by evolutionary biology.
Anyway, let's take a look at some clocks. One of the first clocks that we have is the delta at the end of the great river Mississippi by New Orleans that empties out into the Gulf of Mexico. Now, those in search of oil have drilled both in the Gulf of Mexico as well as into the continental USA, which means into that landmass which comprises the delta. Now, they observe what is deposited dirt, what is virgin dirt, as they drill down into the ground. And so from that we can know how extensive was the delta, how deep it was, how much dirt is deposited there. Also, we can measure how much water is flowing and sediments bringing. I read one figure that some 30,000 tons of dirt are brought down every hour. And so with those things put together, we calculate, find that the whole delta, this is what a delta looks like. It's when a river flows into a larger body of water. The water slows and the sediments it carries begin to accumulate, forming that landmass called a delta. This whole Mississippi River delta could have been formed in 6,000 to 10,000 years. Now, mind you, they don't take into consideration that there had been a worldwide flood, after which maybe half of that delta earth had come down in the first 100 years or so. It indicates a young earth.
It indicates no such thing. Sediment deposition rates show the Mississippi Delta was formed about 6,000 years ago, shortly after the sea level stabilized after the glaciers melted 10,000 years ago. But what does this prove? It proves that the Mississippi Delta is younger than 6,000 years. Who said the Mississippi Delta was present at the creation of the Earth?
Yes, less than 6,000 years ago.
Yes, the Mississippi Delta.
Of course, you shy away from that information. One of the major geological features of the Earth, less than 6,000 years.
The extant Dodos did no such thing. They acknowledged this fact openly, but they also stated that this was not the point. So again, why would the creationist ignore the question of whether the Delta was present at the beginning of the Earth? It's a question that needs to be answered if you honestly want to assert that the Earth is only 6,000 years old. That's why the creationists skipped it. The Mississippi Delta is in fact one of the USA's youngest geological formations.
You don't like that, I guess.
Sorry, what was that?
Then there's the 4,000 year gap between the time that you think the Ice Age ended, 10,000 years ago, and the deposition of the Delta.
This gap can be explained by other geological features across the planet, not to mention the existence of human history or the fact that we as a species have domesticated dogs from wolves for over 10,000 years. This of course was mentioned by the extant Dodos, and once again it was ignored by the creationist.
Which would have been 4,000 years later? So, at the current rate, it took 4,000 years for that deposition to occur?
Why is it that creationists take so long in getting to an actual point?
According to what you just said, no. You just contradicted yourself.
Only if you redefine the meaning of the word contradict and apply it to what the extant Dodos did, which was to explain the point that the Mississippi Delta was not present at the beginning of the planet's life.
What is the oldest living thing on Earth today? Please, no family jokes or things of that nature.
Ha ha.
The oldest living thing is called the bristlecone pine. It's also called the Methuselah pine. It is about 4,300 years old. Whoa, what happened 4,300 years ago? Well, according to the Bible, there was a worldwide flood that completely revamped all the real estate. Plants, animals, and people began to populate the earth about 4,400 years ago. Interesting. How come we don't have anything living older than 4,300 years, older than the time of the flood?
King Clone, a creosote bush ring in the Mojave Desert, is 11,700 years old. It's fun to talk about really old plants. What does any of this have to do with the age of the Earth?
Ah, the old carbon-14 pitfalls again.
The issue of carbon-14 dating will be mentioned again later, but for now all I will say is this is a case of...
I think carbon-14 dating is flawed because I don't like how it relates to other forms of radiometric dating, but I disagree with my Bible.
However, since you're having trouble understanding what Mr. Pendleton's saying here, let me try to explain it to you.
No surprise here. An incompetent creationist who thinks he knows better than two doctoral candidates.
You see, geology provides evidence that there was a global flood on this Earth.
Geology does nothing of the kind. Sediment and rock layers are not sorted by density, nor are they jumbled haphazardly. Fossils are also not sorted by density or jumbled haphazardly. Geological layers on various points of the planet are not uniform. All of these are requirements for a global flood, and not a single one of them has been satisfied.
Now stay with me here. You see, if the event of the Noachian flood is verifiable by science...
It's not, but let's assume for this argument that it is.
This substantiates the Bible.
How does this even follow? This is a horrible logical disconnect.
And since the Bible is then substantiated with science, then it goes to reason that the event of the creation is also true.
How does this even follow? This logical disconnect is even worse than the last one. Mr. Creationist, in order to demonstrate the claims presented in your book of fables and myths, you must provide evidence for each of the claims presented therein. You cannot do so for one claim and then state that this substantiates every other claim in your book.
As is the coming judgment of the world.
Wow, these psychos keep going on about their judgment. It's as though they are ecstatic about the destruction of the planet and their fellow human beings. It's disgusting. It's evil. These people are morally reprehensible. If you need evidence of this, I have left my response to NephilimFree's response to the original series that this video is replacing. In any case, proclaiming that the Bible is true and following up with a threat of eternal torture is a clear indication that these people, this creationist included, have no case to present.
We have the giant sequoia trees of California. Here's a picture of one that's over 300 feet tall, some 21 feet wide at its base. Plenty of room to cut a hole and fit a car in there. And they're about 4,000 years old.
The oldest known giant sequoia is only 3,200 years old, based on ring count. But we should be used to fudge numbers by now.
Now, what's the reason that the bristlecone pine and the sequoia trees are so old? Two reasons. One is their resistance to plant diseases, as well as their resistance to forest fires. Indicates a young Earth.
Not sure how their resistance to forest fires and plant diseases indicates a young Earth. Logic is apparently not a required feature of creation science.
Well, you're not very good at logic at all, as we've seen.
You know, this is really cruel. When their creationist talks about logic, their God kills a kitten.
You see, if they're resistant, that means they're more likely to live.
Not to be too repetitive, but this creationist didn't answer the question. What does this have to do with the age of the Earth?
Obviously, you haven't studied the science behind this at all, which is why you may have made so many fallacious claims.
Has this creationist ever looked in a mirror in his entire life?
You see, the environment of the Earth before the Noachian flood was much different than it is today. The oxygen content was higher, the atmospheric pressure was higher. Plants lived to be much bigger and longer, and so did human beings. Everything was healthier and stronger.
Alright, let's humour this creationist and pretend he's right, and that the oxygen content was higher in the past, and that as a consequence, lifespans were much greater and organisms much bigger than is the case today. Once again, what does this have to do with the age of the Earth?
Another clock that indicates a young Earth is the world's population.
Now so far, I haven't commented on the original video itself because I've preferred to let the extant Dodos speak for themselves. However, on this occasion I want to point out that not only does our creationist spout the same nonsense this guy is doing, it's the same nonsense that Kent Hovind came up with. All I'll say is this: you cannot refute the carrying capacity of the environment.
A few years ago we passed above 6 billion people in the world. We want to make a calculation backwards to find out how much time will it take to have 6 billion people alive on the Earth. Again, I propose an average number of 150 years to duplicate the living population on the Earth. Again, I realize there's times it takes more time than that, times it's taken less time than that, but to get an idea. So we start out with 6 billion people, count back 150 years, and take half of that number, which is 3 billion. We add another 150 years and take half of the previous figure. Keep adding 150 and take a half. As we scroll down to the bottom of the page, we see that after 4,500 years, there would only be 5.5 people left. Whoa! What happened 4,500 years ago? Well, according to the Bible, there was a worldwide flood that cleared the whole earth, and only 8 people survived. Just think, with 8 people and 4,500 years of time, we could have the Earth's population today of over 6 billion people. It agrees with what the Bible says, indicates a young Earth.
Again, with made-up figures pulled out of the nether regions of his lab coat, he reaches his preconceived notion. Population growth has little to do with maximum reproductive capability. Populations are dependent on the carrying capacity of the environment. When the carrying capacity is reached, the population is held stable, as it was for much of man's history before technology allowed us our recent exponential growth. As a comparison, if bacteria were allowed their unlimited reproductive capability, they would fill every square inch of the Earth in less than a week.
Oh, you're not understanding again.
Once again, here we go.
Let's say you have 1,000 people, and these 1,000 people have 2.5 children per generation. Then compare that to 1 million people having 2.5 children per generation, then to 1 billion. You see, population increases exponentially depending on the size of the population.
Right. This creationist has ignored what the extant Dodos have already pointed out, the carrying capacity of the environment. The video I've linked to here will explain this further, but in summary, the population cannot expand past the carrying capacity of the environment no matter what this creationist wishes. It is impossible to survive without resources. Case closed.
Now, you might like to know that these fellows you see in this photograph here were enslaved by evolutionists because they were considered a subrace of man.
I have 2 points to make. The first is this. Those people who enslaved the Aborigines were slavers. Whether they accepted any biological theories or not is inconsequential and irrelevant. The creationist is making an illogical appeal to consequences. And secondly, this creationist is in no position to criticize slavery or murder, given he supports the stories of his God-killing children by propelling their heads against rocks, giving them their last few seconds of life in abject terror.
Some of these guys, these are Aborigines from Australia, some of them were shot, beheaded, and their heads were boiled till all the flesh came off of them. Then their skulls were presented as ape men dug from the earth.
This creationist is rather disgusting. The claim made here is completely nonsensical. Aborigines have similar enough cranial characteristics to other ethnic groups on this planet that only a complete moron or a fucking racist with the same level of intellect as NephilimFree here could possibly mistake them for earlier hominid forms whose cranial cavities were smaller and their bone structures much more pronounced. Secondly, he has no place accusing intelligent, well-educated and hard-working scientists who have dedicated their lives to honest intellectual discourse of presenting dead modern human skulls as ancient hominid fossil forms. He really is a fucking sick and twisted individual.
Personally, I think that if some of them could get away with it today, they'd still be doing this kind of thing. I mean, after all, they're still creating hoaxes to this day. Why not cut somebody's head off, boil it up, and then present it to the world as an ape-man skull dug out of the ground?
Real scientists do not behave in such an ethically vacuous manner. Those few that do will soon find their careers taking a very fast nosedive. The existence of creationists who claim that they were kicked out of their jobs because of their faith, when in fact they were kicked out for violating the core principles of the scientific method, the honest intellectual pursuit of knowledge, is all the evidence that anyone needs for this fact. On the other hand, I have absolutely no trouble accepting the fact that this creationist, along with some of his friends, would do exactly what they accuse sane people of doing.
Now, from the side of evolution, we have this picture from National Geographic, which is of a Homo sapiens. Man knows. And they say it's 92,000 years old. Now, let me tell you something. When we find a fossil, any place, I promise you not a single fossil comes out with a tag that says, "Hi, I'm the fossil of a Homo sapiens, and I'm 92,000 years old." No. People, according to their beliefs, put the names and their dates.
Of course, the beliefs used are the foundational concepts of physics, chemistry, and biology, rigorously tested by experimentation and backed by 1,000 years of evidentiary findings, which I'm pretty sure we'll have to explain to Mr. Pendleton shortly. Who was this guy's chemistry teacher anyway?
I'd like to point out that this is one of the many points the extant Dodos made that our creationist here did not bother to address. I suspect this is because even in his delusions of adequacy, he is not convinced that he can rebut the points made. Like all assumptions that non-creationists and real scientists have made, this one is backed up by extensive testing and demonstration and is supported by extensive record keeping, in turn supported by the collected evidence. Creationists deny this fact and try to make it look like all of the hard work by real scientists amounts to nothing other than guesswork and the occasional field trip.
As we'll see in a little bit, a lot of the dating methods are thoroughly unreliable.
Not as reliable as made-up numbers based on conflicting genealogies? Or is it they do not reliably give the preconceived answers that you want?
But let's be generous. Let's say the first human couple lived 45,000 years ago. One man, one woman, modern human beings. Year zero. 150 years go by, now we're 4. We go to 300 years, now we're 8. Follow out that calculation, how many would we be today? Wow, we'd be standing chest against back, shoulder against shoulder, arms upon legs upon shoulders, miles up in the air, covering the whole surface of the earth. We are not that many people. We do not find that many human artifacts, remains, or bones. It indicates a young earth, just like the Bible says.
Again, carrying capacity determines population, not maximum reproductive potential. A 5-year-old could understand. Live up to the lab coat, buddy.
Well, you obviously do need a 5-year-old, perhaps a bunch of 5-year-olds to help you understand this.
The creationist doesn't know when to quit. Furthermore, listening to him speak in such a fashion about 5-year-olds makes me need to take a shower, badly, using hydrochloric acid. In the meantime, let's listen to what nonsense he comes out with now, shall we?
Since Mr. Pendleton was not able to get it into your head, I'm going to try a little bit myself.
This creationist can't even get a handle on his own problems. He stands no chance whatsoever of getting anything into other people's heads.
I'm not going to read you everything you see on the screen there. You can take the time to do it yourself and learn from the mathematics of it.
This is an excellent example of creationist mathematics. This calculation is wrong, especially as the present population is not 3.5 billion. It's closer to twice that amount. And again, it doesn't take into account the maximum carrying capacity of the surrounding environment.
But your idea that maximum carrying capacity determines the population is fallacious, because it assumes, of course, that people, any one generation of 2 people, will have as many children as possible so long as the population can be supported by the environment.
No, that's wrong. They've made no such suggestion. They said population is determined by carrying capacity. No suggestion was made that any 2 people will fuck the brains out of each other with the express intention of punching out kid after kid until they couldn't. And even if they had made that suggestion, which they didn't, this wouldn't invalidate the fact that a population cannot exceed the maximum available resources within their environment. The excess will not be able to survive to reproductive age. They would starve, for example.
And that's completely false. That's not the way it was in the past with humankind. It's not that way today either.
The creationist never realized that he was making the extant Dodo's point for them.
So your argument is absolutely absurd.
No, the creationist's deliberate distortion of the extant Dodo's argument is what is baseless here, not the actual argument itself.
Ask yourself this. Do you know any couple that has had as many children as it possibly can from the time that they were able to till they were not able to? I don't think you have.
And that was the point the extant Dodos were making. Population is not determined by maximum reproductive potential.
Either your ability to reason is a complete and utter joke.
Given that the creationists made the extant Dodo's point for them, they're not the ones whose reasoning is a complete and utter joke.
Or you're just completely unwilling to accept anything that a creationist says because you don't like the science of it.
Creation, science.
The world would be overpopulated if there were millions of years.
Never mind disease, injuries, predatory threats, resource competition, and so on. Those things apparently don't count.
And that's very much likely to be the case.
Except that this is not the case. Those of us who are sane understand the following. Resources in any given environment are limited. As a consequence, the population cannot possibly reproduce exponentially. If anyone doesn't get it, it's creationists like this one.
Now, some in my audience will be saying, fine, John, that's all well and good, but carbon-14 proves that everything is really, really old.
Carbon-14 dating is a tool, much like John Pendleton. Depending on how it is used, it can be useful or give false results. Carbon-14 dating must be calibrated, but its accuracy once calibrated has been verified using both tree ring counts and by testing of items of known age, like the Dead Sea Scrolls. Furthermore, Carbon-14 dating is not even used to determine the age of the Earth. One of the limitations of this tool is that it cannot be used to date objects much older than 50,000 years. This entire discussion is a red herring. And yes, I did say John Pendleton was a tool.
Okay, let's talk about carbon-14. Now, if you don't know about carbon-14, just hang on for a minute. Let me answer this question for some other people, and then we'll get back to other stuff that maybe is more interesting for you. First of all, how is carbon-14 made? Carbon-14 is made in that a cosmic ray hits nitrogen-14 and changes into carbon-14. Carbon is normally carbon-12. Carbon-14 is unstable. We call it radioactive, in that it's unstable and gives off an emission that eventually reverts back to nitrogen-14. Now, all living things are made up of carbon, and some is carbon-14. Clams, algae, fish, birds, trees, animals, humans, all have lots of carbon, and some is carbon-14. While these things are living, there's a balance, but when there's death, there's a loss of carbon-14. The idea is if we could find out how much carbon-14 is left in something, we could know how long it's been dead. That's what the theory proposes.
The preceding was a passable explanation of the basic principles of radiometric dating. It would serve an introductory high school science class. But here's a few details you'd learn in the college course. First, carbon-14 dating is only used to date objects less than 50,000 years old.
That's a fact that Mr. Pendleton is well aware of. However, how old a thing may be before carbon-14 dating is used on it is speculative. You'll get different answers from different scientists.
You've got to be kidding. The creationist has asserted, as many of his fellows have done, that you will get one answer from one scientist and a wildly different one from another scientist. Not only is this completely incorrect, it is thoroughly dishonest. As you saw in an earlier portion of the video, the creationists showed comparisons between dates in the age of the solar system. These dates implied as unreliable by the creationist actually fell within a 2.2% deviational range. Hardly speculative and wild.
Second, the raw data must be calibrated to account for differences in carbon-14 concentrations.
Carbon-14 dating, like all dating methods, is based on assumption.
No, it's not. The video linked here will explain further.
An item of supposedly known age is used for calibration.
There's no supposedly about it. An item whose age we do know is used for the purposes of calibration.
The common items used are amino acid, racemization dating methods, and tree ring dating methods, all things. And then, of course, come into this, fudge factors.
The creationist has missed a few things. For those of you who are interested, the list is as follows.
You know, dating methods are highly imprecise. In fact, they're all pretty much worthless because they're based upon assumption, you see.
This is a common theme with the creationist. But repeating a lie does not make it truthful.
So long as they're based on assumptions, without empirical evidence, then of course, they're worthless.
Well, then it's just as well that despite the creationist claims to the contrary, radiometric and isochron dating methods all have substantial evidential support and are not based on either circular reasoning or assumptions, but on a precise mathematical law. Perhaps the creationist would like to claim that calculus, trigonometry, or any other type of math is a religion next.
In fact, there's so many problems with carbon-14 dating, I don't even have the time to describe all of them to you, much less expound upon them.
The truth is not that the creationist doesn't have time to describe these so-called problems, it's that he doesn't have the creative capacity to make up these imaginary problems of his in order to fool any more of his followers.
And this is what Mr. Pendleton was alluding to. There's so many variables and pitfalls involved in dating methods, it's not even funny. They are absolutely, completely imprecise, not actually truly scientific. We use scientific methods to try to make it work, but it's just not really scientific. But you think that it is. You think that it's Loctite, solid evidence, empirical information comes from them, which of course it's not. You believe that because you've been told to believe it, and that's called brainwashing.
An accusation of brainwashing coming from a religious fundamentalist is incredibly rich, especially one directed at an institution whose entire mission is the antithesis of indoctrination. There does exist evidence. The principles used to determine how the various radiometric dating tools work are publicly available to anyone wishing to utilize these methods, and everything needed to calibrate and use these tools is available to everyone, including creationists like this one who shit all over the scientific methods with their dishonesty. Here's an idea for the creationist. If he's so convinced that the dozens of radiometric dating methods are flawed, why doesn't he devise one of his own making?
Third, a reservoir effect exists in ocean animals due to different sources of carbon consumption.
You just described one of the many pitfalls to carbon-14 dating. Others include the thickness of the material surrounding the item to be dated, how much carbon-14 was in the food material taken in by the plant or animal during its lifetime, its local environment where it was found, the kind of material it was found in, how close it is to the surface of the Earth, how much solar radiation has struck the item and the Earth. Solar radiation goes several feet down into the Earth. The fact that the Earth has more carbon-14 in its environment now than it did 5,000 years ago due to industrialization, blah, 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 blah.
A scientist discusses radiometric dating. Radiometric dating techniques are based on measuring the decay rates of various isotopes. All of these decay rates follow a precise mathematical law. A creationist hears radiometric dating, blah 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 blah, decay rates, blah 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 blah.
Blah, 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 blah.
And fourth, accelerator-based mass spec techniques allow much more precise dating than earlier decay rates, but the 50,000-year limit is still imposed.
Mass spectrometry dating has its own set of problems.
Mass spectrometry. not mass spectronomy.
And virtually all the problems with decay rate dating apply as well. If you go to this website, you'll find a whole list of quotes from scientists which describe these problems.
A better idea is to consult the scientific literature and read on the details of these so-called problems as they are addressed in their original context. Scientists openly acknowledge the problems of using radiometric dating techniques among other scientific experiment procedures and how to overcome them by proper implementation of the techniques. As the extant Dodos have clearly stated, a hammer is not an effective tool to drive in a nail if you don't have the first fucking clue which end to use.
And which includes calibration, which is a big problem for the very expensive and time-consuming and not wholly accurate mass spectronomy dating methods. Now, if you go to this website, c14dating.com, you'll get yourself a little lesson in hegemony. You see, if you actually researched evolution theory and scoured the internet, visiting evolutionist websites, what you'd find is that often critical links, which provide critical information upon which the foundation of much of their theories are based, is unavailable.
What a load of utter shit. First of all, there is a difference between discussing the problems and workarounds of radioactive decay dating and blatantly misrepresenting the scientific fields involved. This creationist is playing the evil evolutionist conspiracy card. Again. Secondly, parading a broken link to a page that can be found on Google as missing information is taking the fucking piss a little bit.
Now, the reason for this, of course, is because their information is continuously scrutinized.
Yes, most intently by the people who work in the field. Their reputation for being intellectually honest and providing accurate information is worth far more than making shit up for the purposes of propping up the creationist belief system.
It is constantly changing, because it's constantly false.
In all my time on YouTube, I have never seen a creationist who understands the scientific method. It is constantly changing, because as new data becomes available, refinements and accurate adjustments help improve the accuracy of the techniques, and subsequently the results garnered from them. Unlike dogmatic belief which can never change, the beauty of science is that it never rests on its laurels, but instead is in a continual state of adaptation based on the ever-changing world and ever-expanding pool of knowledge.
Now, they suppose lots of things, one of which, for example, is how much carbon-14 was there 2,000 years ago? We don't know. We weren't there.
So we calibrate the data and extrapolate. Or we can stall out all scientific exploration and live in mud huts. Your call.
What we do know is things that we know their age, carbon-14 fails to give the right age.
If you misuse a tool or fail to understand its limitations, it will give incorrect results. Let's have John give some examples of how this happens.
For example, there was a seal that had been dead for 30 years when its carcass was tested with carbon-14, gave an age of death of 4,600 years. A seal recently killed gave an age of 1,300 years.
This is because an animal's balance of carbon-14 is maintained by ingestion of carbon in their food. In the ocean, particularly in the Antarctic, a reservoir effect exists which throws off the normal balance. Plants in the ocean incorporate carbon dioxide into their structure from the surrounding water. If the plants live near upswells of water, as they do in the Antarctic, the water may have been flowing along the deep ocean floor for thousands of years. Animals eat the plants, and seals eat the animals that eat the plants. This reservoir of old carbon throws off the dating. The reservoir effect is highly technical, but it's well known to scientists who understand the tools they use.
Well, this is well and good, but you've just simply described one of the carbon-14 dating problems that I spoke of earlier.
They did far more than that.
Now, what you're doing here, though, is making the fallacious claim. You see, in so many words, you're stating that because scientists know this problem exists, they can calibrate for that.
And a perusal of the literature will detail exactly how this is done.
Which is false.
This is absurd. To give an idea of just how absurd this is, this watch has a problem. If you let it wind down, it cannot keep track of time anymore. But people claim that you can wind up your watch and then set the time correctly afterwards, which is false. See how ridiculous this reasoning gets when applied to a similar situation where calibration is required?
It is completely impossible for them to calibrate for this problem.
Really? Completely impossible? To understand why this claim is complete and utter bollocks, it is necessary to explain the limitations of carbon-14 dating again, and what causes incorrect results. Carbon-14 dating is only useful to 50,000 years. Using it on rocks will not work. Using it on coal is especially mindless. You do not use radiometric dating on contaminated structures or items, or if you have no choice in the matter, you take clean samples where possible, and of course you make sure you advise the readers of your findings that you have done so, and accounted for the inevitable differences that will occur in your testing. You don't do what creationists do and use contaminated samples to claim that radiometric dating is inaccurate. Taking multiple samples from the same items will assist in the process, as they can be cross-checked and a more accurate result given at the end of the experiment. Finally, carbon-14 dating can only be used on samples that contain carbon. They cannot be used on anything that is expected to be older than 50,000 years, certainly not for geologic structures such as volcanoes and rock formations. All of the variables mentioned by the creationist are quantifiable. As a result, it is eminently possible to predict their effects. It is not a significant problem to calibrate for quantifiable variables in any of the countless situations we face every day, and radiometric dating is no exception to this. So, according to this creationist, it is completely impossible to calibrate for material thickness, atomic composition, and resultant carbon-14 absorption rates in the material, the diet of a given organism and its habitat. I'm pretty sure zoologists would love to learn it, they have no clue whatsoever. The environmental factors surrounding the material, or the casing of the material, for example rock formation. And also, according to this creationist, geologists are too stupid to know where they dug up a given sample or how far they dug to get to the sample in the first place, how to study and analyse the materials in their environment, or how to travel to any given dig site, or how far an object is from the surface of the earth, despite busily digging down into the soil and rocks themselves, how far they are required to go down to dig it up, how to measure the distance they had actually gone to dig it up. And environmental scientists are too stupid to know how to measure the radiation levels in the environment, and how to extrapolate carbon-14 levels in the environment, or how to measure pollution in the environment, cross-reference with historical records, and extrapolate this data to measure the carbon-14 content in the atmosphere. Is this really the case, or is it more likely that creationists are making shit up again? After all, this creationist has an MSU in evolution autocarianism from Bible Belt Vapidia Polytechnic in Google, Mississippi.
The bark from a living tree gave an age of 10,000 years. It was alive. The shell from living snails gave an age of 27,000 years. Some of their membrane and tissue dated at 3,000 years. From the other extreme, we have coal from Russia that's supposedly 300 million years old, gave an age of 1,680 years.
Unsourced comments are difficult to disprove. This is why we source all of our comments. When your source is Hovind, and Hovind's source is God told me, you're no longer talking about science, lab coat notwithstanding.
No sources, you say?
No, they said unsourced comments are difficult to disprove. Illiteracy is also unimpressive, aside from the accusation of hypocrisy being incorrect, since the extant Dodos provided sources for each and every single claim they made and or addressed. Hypocrisy is spelt thusly. This creationist is a complete and utter moron who does not even know how to access a spell checker. And if you think that's harsh, then yes, you're right. But I will be harsh with idiots who exemplify the Dunning-Kruger effect so blatantly as this creationist continues to do to this day, more than 3 years after he made this pile of shit.
Mr. Pendleton is a source. He is a working professional chemist.
Mr. Pendleton may be qualified to bachelor's level in chemistry, but that does not mean he is a working professional in the field, nor does it mean that he can trump a doctoral qualified scientist in the field of geology, cosmology, physics, biology, or even chemistry itself. And no one, no matter how qualified they are or how competent, can be their own source. Their experiments and their findings, those can be sources once they've been reviewed and published, but not before, especially not to the public.
Carbon-14 is not reliable for dating things that used to live.
Any tool is only as reliable as the person employing it. A hammer is not a reliable tool to drive in a nail if you don't know which end to use.
On the other extreme, we have a process for dating rocks. This is called potassium argon. In 1801, a volcano in Hawaii had an eruption, and the lava flowed and touched the water, stayed in there, solid there. They took those samples 167 years later to see how long it had been since the volcano erupted. We already know, 167 years. But with potassium argon, we got dates between 100 million years to 3 billion years ago that it erupted. And so, as I mentioned, for things that we do know, we find that that also is unreliable.
Frankly, that was an outright lie. Let me explain. Xenoliths are foreign inclusions in rock formations, one shown in the lava below. Scientists wishing to refine their dating techniques use potassium-argon dating to date the xenoliths in a lava flow. As expected, the xenoliths dated to significantly older periods than the surrounding lava flows. This proved care must be taken not to include xenoliths in geological dating. Now, a creationist named Henry Morris, wishing to confuse the truth, exploited this finding and concocted the perversion John Pendleton just espoused. It is a simple lie.
Also in the Grand Canyon, we have lava that has flown over the edge of the canyon, over the rocks, as well as a layer down below that's called the Cardenas, which is volcanic rock. Those two were tested. Obviously, the one that's flowed over the side of the canyon is the much younger lava flow. The one that's way down in one of the rock layers, the Cardenas layer, is obviously much older.
Before we proceed any further, I'm going to point out a critical factor that the creationist has either neglected to factor into his response to the extant dodos, or has deliberately left out in order to fool his gullible followers. What you are now seeing in this clip is Mr. Pendleton making a claim specifically regarding the lava flow that is part of the Grand Canyon. This is an important point I wish to raise because it will factor into my response to the creationist, as well as point out that the extant dodos were correct in drawing attention to a fiat crust that wasn't part of the lava flow that was supposed to have been dated in this experiment. Please bear this in mind when the creationist makes his response shortly.
But in almost all of the testing that was done, the older one tested out millions of years younger than the younger one. And the younger one tested out millions of years older than the older one. And so, consistently we've seen that it's not reliable. The Earth is young.
Wow, that was just barely coherent. Now, let me try to explain. First, misunderstand a basic fact about isochron dating. For the dating to be accurate, the samples must be cogenetic, meaning they must be from the same source. This fact is rather obvious to even the naive observer, and is well known to scientists employing the tool of radiometric dating. The dating experiment that Pendleton is referring to was done by a creationist who set out to disprove the age of the Grand Canyon. He chose 5 non-cogenetic samples, one from a fiat crust that wasn't even part of a lava flow. The samples contained elements of the lithospheric mantle under the Grand Canyon, which is substantially older than the other elements. This skewed the data. The only conclusion is that sloppy science yields false results.
Well, this is false.
No, Mr. Creationist. This in fact is true. Sloppy science does yield false results. Let's have a creationist give us an example of sloppy science.
It's not necessary for one sample to be from the same source as another to attempt to achieve a date for either.
Laughably absurd. For isochron dating to work, it is essential that you take cogenetic samples. Cogenetic meaning from the same source. This is absolutely an essential requirement.
Your fallacy is based on the assumption.
I have a hard time accepting creationists behaving like they know how the minds of other people far more intelligent than they are work. Also, this creationist doesn't know what the true meaning of the word fallacy actually is, and wouldn't know it even if it blew his fucking head off with an atomic bomb.
That all evolutionist scientists have in regards to radiometric dating or isometric dating.
First of all, there is no such thing as an evolutionist scientist. Second of all, the term creationist is looking for is isochron, not isometric. He has had this pointed out to him in the original video the extant dodos made, yet he seems incapable of accepting corrections. To be certain, this isn't restricted to creationists, but they do exemplify this trait. Thirdly, just like a fundamentalist libertarian, this fundamentalist creationist presumes to know not only how other people think, but presumes to know more than the people who actually do the hard work in their respective fields. Admitting that they are actually wrong is simply not an option. Ever.
And that is that you use one thing of known age, such as a rock from a particular layer that you presume is of a particular age.
Internal consistency is too much to ask of creationists. In any event, this is further evidence the creationist simply does not know how radioactive decay works, despite having had it explained on numerous occasions not only by myself, but by many others, some of them far more qualified than I am on the subject.
To date another rock. Furthermore, your contention that the samples must be from lava flows somehow for the information to be workable is of course fallacious. It's absurd.
That's not what the extant dodos were saying. They were essentially pointing out that isochron dating of a lava flow, which was the location being studied in the experiment, requires that you take samples from the same source. They mentioned the Theocrist not being from a lava flow to illustrate that it was definitely from another source. They did not, at any time, state that radiometric dating required the source to be from lava and only from lava. This is a blatant misrepresentation of their explanation.
Virtually all the layers of the Grand Canyon, from bottom to top, are sedimentary layers.
This is not entirely correct. Most of the rock in the Grand Canyon comes from a sedimentary source, but there are igneous rocks present in some areas of the geologic column of the canyon, as well as at least one volcanic lava flow from approximately 1.8 million to 500,000 years ago. Geologic uplift is responsible for much of the geologic features present in the canyon.
Your argument is baseless.
Once again, it is the creationist deliberate misrepresentation of the extant dodos argument that is baseless, not the actual argument itself.
It's based on, first of all, an assumption that all of the samples must be taken from the same layer.
Taking samples from different sources will result in different ages being returned. The creationist seems unable to grasp this fact.
Which is the fallacy of evolutionists involving isometric dating and radiometric dating.
Isochron, not isometric.
Secondly, it's also based on an assumption that the scientist must choose the kind of rock that you select, that you prefer, which is lava.
Another misrepresentation of the extant dodos. They made no mention whatsoever of any preference that the samples collected in any particular date experiment must come from a lava flow. The creationist has chosen to latch onto the word lava and claim that the extant dodos said that this was the only valid source to be used in radiometric dating. Those of us who are sane know better.
The scientist can date any rock he chooses. Your argument is based strictly upon a desire to attempt to discredit the information.
Yet another misrepresentation of the extant dodos. And if anyone is attempting to discredit the information here, it is the creationist. When a creationist engages in sloppy science, they will get false results. When they parade those false results as some kind of proof that a completely unrelated field of study is rendered disproven, then it is our responsibility to call them on it. When a creationist misrepresents someone who calls them on it, I will call him or her out for their dishonesty.
And this is because it upsets your worldview.
Not really sure what the worldview of the extant dodos has to do with geological science.
Furthermore, you might like to know that non-cogenetic samples are often used to obtain a date for a median sample.
First, you cannot use multiple non-cogenetic samples to obtain a date for a median sample. This is ludicrous word salad. You can use multiple non-cogenetic samples to obtain a median date. That is correct grammatical syntax. Secondly, there's no problem with this procedure so long as it's the intention of the scientists involved in the experiment to begin with, and as long as they declare it. It only becomes a problem when dishonest creationists like these people come along, take multiple non-cogenetic samples, and then claim that because they're different, radiometric dating must somehow be flawed. That is dishonest.
Of course, you didn't mention that, did you?
Once again, getting two samples from separate sources to work out a median date is far different from getting non-cogenetic samples from separate sources and then claiming that because the resulting dates are different, radiometric dating must therefore be flawed. Creationists who do this are frowned upon by real scientists. To restate the extant dodo's point, if you misuse a tool or fail to understand its limitations, it will give incorrect results.
Now this could be because of either one, you didn't know this, or two, you don't want the viewer of your video to know this.
I only have two options, one or two. I'll take option number 3. It is not relevant to the point that the extant dodos were making.
Some say, well, you need a long period of time to make fossils. Well, there's lots of fossils out there. Here's one of my favorite ones. This is a cowboy boot. This was found in West Texas. And the right-hand image here, we see that the poor cowboy broke his leg, and his leg and foot stayed inside the boot. They did a scan of the toe section. All 5 toe bones are in there. It's all fossilized. This was found in the 1980s. The flip side shows the design that's on the boot. So they went looking in West Texas, the different cowboy boot factories, and found that a factory said, yeah, that's our boot. That's a design that we used in the 1950s. In 30 years, this whole thing was fossilized. Not millions of years, but a very short period of time.
Now, if you excavated your limestone boot nestled betwixt a horde of fossils radiometrically dated to the Cambrian era, you could conceivably falsify the geologic timescale theory. However, if your boot was sitting in ordinary hard water, known as hard because it contains calcium carbonate, also known as limestone, in some field somewhere, then what you have is a neat boot. That there, my friend, is a neat boot. That's all.
Yes, it's a neat boot. But you completely tried to skirt the issue, didn't you?
Isn't it funny how creationists always project their own behavior onto their critics? The cowboy boot is not a fossil. There was no skirting involved. Once again, if you find a boot nestled betwixt a horde of fossils radiologically dated to the Cambrian era, you could conceivably falsify the geologic timescale. But if you find it in an ordinary hard water that contains calcium carbonate, also known as limestone, in some field somewhere, then all you have is a neat boot. Since this boot was not found in a rock formation buried betwixt a horde of fossils radiologically dated to the Cambrian era, he cannot claim that this disproves the geologic timescale theory.
Which is, of course, to show that fossilization does not require thousands of years, or millions of years.
Wrong. This cannot falsify the requirements for fossilization, the removal of all carbon material from an object comprised of carbon atoms, and its replacement with minerals from the surrounding environment. The reason is simple. Fossilization is a separate process from the collection of limestone deposits that are a result of something settling in hard water. Furthermore, the boot isn't petrified. It still contains carbon if its appearance is anything to go by, and I'd be willing to wager that the same is true of the broken bones inside the boot too.
Which has been a long-held evolutionist fallacy. But the real point Mr. Pendleton was trying to make, which either went over your head or you tried to skirt, is that since fossilization requires something to be buried rapidly...
This is also wrong. Per mineralization, the rapid burial and sealing off of organisms is only one type of fossil preservation that has been discovered. Others include molds, where the only thing left is an organism-shaped hole in the rock, casts, which are molds later filled with minerals, endocasts, where minerals fill the internal cavity of an organism, orthogenic mineralization, which is a delicately preserved and extremely detailed fossil, replacement and recrystallization, compression fossils, where a chemical reduction of the complex organic molecules composing the organism's tissues occurs, leaving a phytoleme, impression, where the phytoleme is lost and all that remains is an impression of the fossil in the surrounding rock, and adpression, where these occur at the same time. Bioimmeration, where a skeletal organism overgrows or otherwise subsumes another organism, preserving the latter, or an impression of it, within the skeleton, is the last one. Many of these can occur where the surrounding environment is not completely sealed off from oxygen or other gases,
and thus sealed off from oxygen and predators, etc. Then the massive amount of fossils which are in the earth, from bottom to top in the crust, is evidence of a massive global flood.
This is absolutely not the case. Ignoring for the moment that a major worldwide flood would wipe out all life on Earth, the creationist needs to answer the following question. The fossil record has been demonstrated to contain fossils that are not jumbled haphazardly, nor are they sorted by density. The geologic deposits of sediment and volcanic rock are likewise not jumbled in a haphazard fashion, nor are they sorted by density. Please explain why this is.
Which, of course, is why there are so many living fossils in the world, thousands of them.
And also why there are UFOs and they come from Satan.
Animals not changed whatsoever in supposedly millions and millions and millions and millions and hundreds of millions of years.
That was utterly pathetic.
Unchanged from virtually every fiber of living thing.
That is a lie. While organisms in some environments appear very similar to extinct species that have populated the Earth several millions or even billions years ago, this is due to the fact that the environments that they are adapted to have changed very little, meaning that there was almost no selective pressure on them. This is not to say that they are identical, they are not, just very similar.
Oh, the Earth is so old, isn't it? But it's a free world. You're welcome to believe that lie if you like.
Just as the creationist is also free to believe that this is a lie if he so desires. The reality of the situation is of course very different. No global flood, a verifiable age far older than biblical literalists will ever accept, and the vast biodiversity of life on this planet that can only be explained in the light of evolution.
What you're not welcome to do is spread lies.
What the creationists are not welcome to do is prevent sane people from having modern science taught in schools just because it contradicts the words written in their book of fables and myths. Doing so upsets sane people, because biblical and Quranic literalists who behave in this way are encroaching on our right to provide a decent level of education to our future generations.
And try to convince other people that the Earth is billions of years old.
Scientists aren't interested in convincing morons like NephilimFree's of the actual age of the Earth. People such as him are beyond help. Scientists are instead interested in sharing this information with those who can further the pursuit of scientific discourse, something that obviously does not apply to creationists. As for the age of the Earth being billions of years old, that's what the evidence is for.
This water wheel of wood had water flowing over it. In a matter of 60 years, the wood became petrified wood. It became rock. 60 years, petrified wood, not millions of years.
Neat wheel.
This bottle, encased in rock with a ceramic jar on the left-hand side, was 130 years in the bottom of the ocean in a ship that had crashed and wrecked off the coast of Australia. And yet, because of natural elements there, rock had actually formed around the ceramic jar and the bottle in only 130 years, not millions of years.
Neat bottle.
A miner dropped his hat by accident into a water hole inside of a mine. He couldn't fish it out. Somebody fished it out 50 years later. It had been turned into a fossilized hat, as hard as a helmet that a motorcyclist would wear. 50 years, fossilized hat.
Notice even his source has fossil in quotes. Oh, and nice hat.
These pliers were found on the edge of a beach, thoroughly encrusted with built up of sand and rock, all fossilized around these pliers. Even a piece of shell is still seen here. Fossilized pliers in a very short period of time, not millions of years.
Notice even his source has fossil in quotes. Oh, and nice pliers. This is just getting repetitive.
Oh dear.
Oh dear indeed.
The quotations were because the pliers themselves didn't fossilize. Stone formed around them.
And this statement illustrates the extant Dodo's point. This entire line of reasoning is a red herring.
Proving it doesn't take millions of years for stone to form, which evolutionists seem to think.
Evolutionists don't think anything of the sort. Sane people understand that mineralization can happen very quickly, but that is not the point. The point is that fossilization is another process, and that the fossil record is structured in such a way that no matter how long it took these fossils to form and have their carbon replaced by minerals, the timescale is still correct because of other corroborating evidence presented in the extant Dodo's video that the creationist has tried and dismally failed to discredit.
Why do evolutionists expect creationists to do all their homework?
We expect nothing of the sort. We expect creationists to misrepresent the hard work of all the real scientists that have gone on before. This is borne out not only in Pendleton's original mischaracterization of scientific methodology, but in NephilimFree's pathetic and laughable response here. The ad hominem slide has been cut.
In 1886, in New Zealand, there was a volcano that erupted and did a lot of destruction to the surrounding communities. As time went by, people went back into these areas to dig and see what they could find, things of any kind of worth. They found this bowler cap, which basically is made out of cloth, but this is now turned into rock. Fossilized hat in just a few years, not millions of years.
Maybe this guy left it there? Oh, come on, we already did the nice hat joke. The repetition of this red herring is boring us. We've edited out the petrified ham. That was just embarrassing for him.
Yes, indeed, a fossilized ham.
No, not fossilized, petrified. There's a difference.
Lots of things.
Notice that the creationist failed to elaborate on these lots of things.
Of course, this proves that it doesn't take millions of years or even tens of thousands of years for things to fossilize.
Unfortunately for the creationist, it does nothing of the sort. A petrified ham is not a fossil. A mineralized hat is not a fossil. A cowboy boot found in a field somewhere is not a fossil. A petrified water wheel that has been affected by hard water containing limestone is not a fossil.
Like evolutionists believe, see? Rapid burial, isolation from oxygen and other environmental factors and scavengers, you see? It's always a red herring when it goes against what evolutionists believe, right?
No. A red herring is a deliberate attempt to divert a process of inquiry by changing the subject. This is what Mr. Pendleton is guilty of, and this is what this creationist who is responding to the extant dodos is also guilty of, changing the subject and going off on a tangent. Neither of them have addressed the actual points raised. This discussion is supposed to be about fossils, not petrified hams, mineralized boots, hats, wheels, or other items that have accelerated mineralization due to limestone deposits.
As long as you believe in your fantasies, you're safe, right? Get into that safe house, quick! Hurry!
That's pathetic.
These beautiful gems are called opals. And according to evolutionary theory, it takes millions of years to make opals. Now there's opal mines in a place in Australia, and a opal dealer went and just took some of the powder from these mining areas, placed it in different jars with different acids and chemicals. He is making opals in a matter of months. These opals are so fine, so beautiful, that even the opal dealers cannot tell the difference between them and ones that are dug out of the mine. Even more so, under an electron microscope, you cannot tell the difference between the mined opals and the ones that he's created in jars in a matter of a few months. Takes millions of years to make opals? Afraid not. Natural processes are able to do it in a matter of months.
Synthetic opals may be distinguished from natural opals by the regularity of the crystal pattern, the lack of fluorescence under UV light, the lack of density and porosity, the fact that the imitations contain substances not found in opal, like plastic stabilizers, and his natural processes involve a chemist and a fairly complicated synthetic pathway. We can also make diamonds quicker than nature. We kick nature's butt. What this has to do with how long it takes natural formation to occur is beyond us, though.
The original Educating a Dodo included the following segment. For some reason it was not included in the copy that Berean Beacon has on his channel. It is for this reason that I am forced to include my original responses in order to maintain the original creationist response to the extant dodos.
Let me help you understand what you put your own blind faith into, since you don't do your own homework.
Creationist hubris and arrogance always ceases to amaze me.
Circular reasoning.
The creationist has just moved off of the subject of accelerated synthesis to make a claim about circular reasoning. Ignoring the red herring for a moment, here is an example of circular reasoning. Why should we trust the Bible? It's the inspired word of God. How do we know it's the inspired word of God? God tells us these things. How do we know God is real? Because it says so in the Bible. How do we know we should trust the Bible? Because it's the inspired word of God.
Is at the basis for a great deal of evolutionist philosophy.
Those of us who understand real science knows that this creationist claim is without foundation.
But then so is an utter lack of scientific evidence, and a lot of hegemony as well.
This is the common form of projection employed by creationists who seek to divert away from the fact that they provide no evidence for their own bullshit, but instead attack real science in the hopes that nobody sane will notice.
In fact, evolutionism, that's right.
Evolutionism, that's wrong. Evolutionism is a term invented by creationists who seek to make it appear like a belief system when it is nothing of the sort. Such is the dishonest nature of creationists.
Is rife with hoaxes, to this very day, as you've seen.
All we've seen are misrepresented data from real scientists and creationist propaganda claims. Claiming that the existence of Piltdown as a fraud and Archaeoraptor as a more recent hoax that fooled the scientific community when only the tabloid equivalent of scientific press even bothered with it, as evolutionism is rife with hoaxes, is laughable. It ignores the massive numbers of genuine evidence that exists for the theory of evolution.
In fact, the geologic column is imaginary.
Funny how we can go and see it for ourselves then, isn't it, Mr. 2 years of research?
So what Mr. Pendleton's trying to help you understand is that when you take the billions of years of imaginary time out of the evolutionist ideas, you're left with nothing.
And the only way that these two creationists, John Morris Pendleton and NephilimFree's, can do this is by blatantly lying, creating straw men of evolution, geology, plate tectonics and physics, misrepresenting scientific evidence, making baseless claims, appealing to ridicule and using red herrings, and disgusting insults with intense frequency. Actual evidence would be interesting, but unfortunately for these two nutjobs, the evidence supports real science.
Because science doesn't provide evidence of evolution. In fact, it provides evidence of creation.
This is another of a series of lies. These creationists just don't know when to stop lying for their beliefs. Frankly, it's disappointing that they feel the need to be dishonest when their fellow theists can accept observational reality and reconcile it with their belief systems without having to resort to the same childish, dishonest, insane tactics.
You say you're a college student, so I have a challenge for you. Ask any of your professors this.
Can I play too?
Can you provide me with evidence of any permanent change in morphology, homology, or body plan?
Permanent change? Evolution is not your retirement fund. Nothing is permanent. Everything changes. The creationist is making another straw man.
In the fossil record, or which is due to mutation.
That was a disappointment. The professor would accuse you of making a straw man of evolution, and rightly so.
I promise you this.
Creationist promises are empty and meaningless, as we're about to witness.
You'll get speculation and conjecture instead of scientific evidence.
No, actually, what you'll get is a remedial class on the basics of evolution, so that you don't ask such a stupid question in the future. The extant Dodos are not stupid enough to make that mistake, unlike NephilimFree's.
You're learning, aren't you?
We're learning indeed. Just how dishonest, arrogant, delusional, paranoid, insane, narcissistic, and reprehensible these creationists are. That's what we're learning. They have no scientific lessons to teach, especially when they cannot even get the basics right in the first place. This concludes the inclusion of the missing original material. Scores for this segment will be added to the tally. We will now proceed on our regular schedule.
I took this picture near Monterrey, Mexico, and what this billboard says in English is publicity for the Garcia Caverns in Monterrey, Mexico. Of course they are brainwashing us.
If you can be brainwashed with that sound and a pencil, you have bigger problems than billboards. Of course, creationists would know about using billboards to brainwash people. Okay, 6 minutes are edited from the end of this video. You're welcome. No new information was discussed. There were only more tedious examples of how man can duplicate natural formation quickly. But as mentioned, man's ingenuity does not change the rate of natural formation.
Let's be realistic about this.
It's a shame that the creationists did nothing of the sort. It would have made for a pleasant and refreshing change.
What you really mean is no information that I like because it upsets my worldview and therefore I refuse to accept it.
First of all, polonium halos have been refuted for a long time. Second of all, the creationist has, once again, changed the subject. Thirdly, if the creationist knows nothing other than projection, it's hardly a surprise that he isn't directly involved in science or scientific inquiry.
Now, the examples that Mr. Pendleton provided are new in the area of evolution thinking, you see, because evolution is a 200-year-old philosophy started by a French amateur geologist and an Englishman who got pissed off at God and stopped preaching.
The creationist, of course, did nothing to address the fact that the ingenuity of human beings does nothing to change the rate of natural formation. He has completely ignored it. In fact, throughout this entire video series of his, he has avoided addressing the points directly and has instead chosen to change the subject or engage in insulting behaviour rather than engaging in an intellectually honest response to the points raised. Furthermore, the rebellion from God argument is not only the favoured attack of the biblical literalist, but it is also an invalid argument against scientific inquiry. Charles Darwin did not form any form of philosophy. He initiated the scientific inquiry into life's adaptation to the surrounding environment that led to the modern theory of evolution, a theory that concerns itself with biology only. As I stated at the beginning of the video, this creationist favours the ad hominem attack as if it were a perfectly acceptable and valid argument against biology.
This information is new. It's less than 30 years old.
30 years is not new. Assuming that this information was not manipulative, deceitful propaganda drummed up by creationists like this one, it would have been succeeded by developments that are happening today and have been happening constantly for centuries. Scientific discovery is a continual process.
And for you, it's very new.
And so begins a lengthy ad hominem attack on the extant dodos.
Because you haven't researched anything regarding evolution theory to speak of. You watched a couple of evolutionist videos and you think you know everything about evolution. But you don't seem to have learned much because your mind is closed to scientific information which refutes your worldview and upsets it. Makes you think, oh no, there might be a God. There might be a creator and I'm responsible to him. Well, you know what, so what? Tough luck, kid.
Just as an aside, evolutionary biologist Dr. Kenneth Miller is a practicing Catholic, which despite the protests of evangelicals counts as a Christian. Francis Collins, the director of the Human Genome Project, and a proponent of evolutionary theory, is an evangelical Christian. Evolution does not require a rejection of religious faith. It is a branch of science. Religion is irrelevant.
Let me give you a basic recipe for evolution. You can take this home to Mama and ask her to cook it. Take 1 part fossil record that does not show any transitional change from one kind into another, no transitional forms living on the planet or in the fossil record. Take 1 part genetic mutation predominantly caused by the sun, which does not cause permanent morphological change, body plan change, or homological change. Now add to this recipe millions and millions of years and bake that in a secular school for 12 years. And the result is an evolution theory, and you have a young person who is deceived, does not believe in a creator, because it's been worked out of their brain with lies. Now, let your dish cool for a little while, pull the aluminum foil off of it, and behold the amateur evolutionist inside, who can't tell the difference between science and speculation, conjecture, and hoaxes, who then makes themselves look stupid on the internet by repeating such jargon.
So concludes the lengthy ad hominem attack on the extant dodos. As you may have noticed, it was also saturated with outright lies, appeals to ridicule, numerous logical fallacies, and personal attacks. Clearly their position is crazy if they have to resort to this sort of behaviour. The creationists also violated the philosophy of science. Science can make no comment on the supernatural. As an aside, the extant dodos are at the very least qualified to bachelor's levels. It is likely that in order to start on a PhD program they would have needed a master's qualification too. Assuming that they have completed their MD PhD program, they are now either qualified as medical doctors or scientific doctorates. The creationist claimed at the start of the video that there was only one of them and that he had no college degree, which he subsequently denied he did when he responded to myself the first time around. In any event, he has lied numerous times. It's also laughable given that the most this creationist is likely to have in terms of qualifications is a diploma in photography, even if he has any qualifications at all, and that the extant dodos have their education at the top state-accredited university known as the University of California, Berkeley.
This concludes my generous efforts to end your brainwashing.
Arrogance is not generosity. Projection is not knowledge. Creationists are part of religious institutions who have several centuries of history and expertise detailing their extensive brainwashing and censorship activities, often at the cost of innocent lives as exemplified by the Dark Ages.
There will be others.
I've no doubt there will be, and we will deal with their misinformation and dishonesty for as long as necessary to eliminate this superstitious nonsense.
But before I go, let me inform you of something that you're probably not aware of. And that is that the fallacy of evolution is dying quickly.
Creationists have been claiming that evolutionary biology has been in crisis for over a century and a half. In reality, of course, biology has continued to gather evidential support and is unlikely to be rejected by anyone other than religious crazies like this one here.
Especially in the last 30 years, and very much so in the last 10. Secular teachers and college professors are tiring of being ridiculed by their students, tiring of being asked questions for which there is no logical, no scientific answer.
Indeed they are. I'd be tired if I had a student constantly trying to use fallacy-laden arguments for their mythical book of fables when said book contradicts observational reality. and I would deal with the problem.
Which provides evidence of evolution. There will be a period of time during the next 20 to 30 years where evolution will be taught alongside creationism, and shortly after that, evolutionism will be gone completely from all educational institutions in the entire world.
Those of us who don't live under a rock know otherwise. Creationism was taught as the only acceptable and factual idea for thousands of years before modern scientists found out through the evidence that this was all a load of bollocks. Science goes where the evidence is, unlike creationism.
That day is coming upon us very quickly.
Which is why creationists desperately avoid the peer review process, play the evil evolutionist conspiracy card, and instead try to win popular support by lobbying and through religious popularity, political and legal systems. As I've stated many times before, it is up to sane people across the world to ensure that these creationists do not get their way and plunge us into another dark age where people are killed for having the wrong belief or for trying to learn about the world just because that knowledge contradicts a 2,000 to 3,000 year old book of fables and myths. To conclude this video, our creationist did not address a single point that the extant Dodos made. Not one. Not even when he was giving the appearance of addressing some of their statements, such as those on radiometric dating. I have pointed out the examples,